Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Melissa Sweat, and I'll be moderating our webinar today. Thank you for joining us for the People on the Go Lunch and Learn webinar. Before we start, I'd just like to do a quick check to make sure that you can hear my voice just fine and see the screen. I'm going to go ahead and flip back and forth to these first slides. Let's just see that everything's working fine. Awesome. Go ahead, and if you haven't just yet, enter in a yes, everything's good in the questions panel. Go ahead and give that a test. Thank you, everyone. I see your comments there. By the way, that's the same questions panel that we'll be using to take your questions at the end of the presentation. If any questions come up during, feel free to ask them, or if you need any assistance, please feel free to ask them as well in that panel. But we will be reserving questions until the end, as we have a shortened format today for our Lunch and Learn session. But we will be having a nice Q&A at the end for you. Okay, today's session is From Scattered to Centered, Understanding and Transforming the Distracted Brain. And I have with me Dr. Alicia Mayer, who I'll be introducing in just a moment. Just a quick background about why we have these sessions, especially for those who are with us for the first time. We have these sessions because our focus at People on the Go is productivity and leadership in the workplace. And the topics that you see on the screen are the topics that we cover. I invite you to check out the resources available to you. Our Less is More blog, which you can find on our website, people-onthego.com, and you can go to the blog section there. I also invite you to join our Accomplishing More with Less groups on Facebook and LinkedIn, and you can also follow our founder, Pierre Kawand, on Twitter. One last announcement before we dive in. We're going to be giving away some prizes at the toward the end here. I'll announce how to enter. You just actually need to submit the feedback form to enter into the contest. We're going to be giving away 3 copies of Dr. Mayer's book, From Scattered to Center, and then we'll also be giving away 3 copies of Pierre Kawand, our founder's new book, The Perfect 15-Minute Day Journal. That will be coming out June 8th, and we'll be sending you more information about that. The journal is intended to help you stay focused, get more accomplished, and feel happier during your workday. Okay, great. And now I'll be introducing Dr. Mayer. Dr. Alicia Mayer is a board-certified diplomate of the American Board of Psychiatry and Neurology, with subspecialty certification in psychosomatic medicine. She practices integrative psychiatry at the Akasha Center for Integrative Medicine in Santa Monica, California. Dr. Mayer is passionate about translating the knowledge of neuroscience into tools and techniques to enhance individual lives. In addition to 20 years of working with patients, she also teaches medical students as assistant clinical professor at UCLA and defines the state of practice through cutting-edge research with the RAND Corporation. She has lectured to thousands of professionals on a variety of topics in several countries. She has particular expertise in treating ADHD and wrote a book to help adults recognize and overcome the struggles of this disorder, entitled From Scattered to Centered, Understanding and Transforming the Distracted Brain, which is available on Amazon. In addition, she has written several articles for world-renowned medical journals, such as JAMA, and her expertise has been used by Medscape, Psychiatric Times, Journal of General Internal Medicine, and the International Association for Cognitive Behavioral Therapy, and several others. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Mayer. This transition should just take a moment here.
Great, thank you, Melissa, and thank all of you so much for joining me to learn how you can understand and transform the distracted brain in order to become less scattered and more centered. So as she mentioned, I'm an integrative psychiatrist who specializes in treating adult attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD. The integrative part means that I use a variety of techniques to help people become the people they want to be. Now that may include medication, but also it involves teaching a variety of behavior skills and life tips. So one thing that I've noticed through the years, and I'm sure you have too, is how modern life is making us all a little more scattered and feeling anything but centered. So I've been fascinated to watch symptoms that were hallmarks of ADHD now showing up in just about everyone. And this is because the way we currently use technology is actually changing the way our brains function. And this is generally in a direction that causes us to be less calm and effective. So that'll be the focus of today's webinar. We're going to look at the variety of ways that we've become scattered, and I hope you have a way of taking notes because I'm going to be giving you a lot of ideas and methods to transform your brain so that you can become more centered. So starting out, we have pictures that reflect my own journey from being the rambunctious child with ADHD on the left to the much more centered adult on the right. In this webinar, I'm going to go through the tools that helped me personally to overcome ADHD and ones that have helped many of my patients. Now, you may not have anything that could be considered a disorder, but as I mentioned, modern life is causing ADHD symptoms in all of us, so all of us must learn how to use our brains differently to cope with all the information that comes at us, and that's where these tools are going to come in. So I've organized this webinar according to the core symptoms that I see when diagnosing ADHD, that of course I'm seeing in a lot of other people, and then I'll run through each of these scattered symptoms and explain a little bit about what's going on in the brain, both of someone who has ADHD causing the symptoms versus someone who has a normal brain that they just aren't using optimally due to the changes induced by the way we use technology. Regardless of the cause, I'll then give you tips to transform each of these symptoms. Now, of course, if you find that these tips aren't enough, it's possible that you would want to be evaluated for ADHD and explore actual treatment options. But first, what does scattered look like? What am I referring to? So many of the scattered symptoms have become so normal that we don't even see them as problems. So being distracted by phones, for example, disorganization, running late, feeling frazzled and overwhelmed, trying to do too much. It doesn't have to be this way, but we're so used to it. So we can maintain a sense of being centered and at peace by adjusting the ways we use our brains. Now, if you think about it, for thousands of years, there were only so many distractions and only so much information that was even available to people each day. With the advent of cell phones and the internet, suddenly there's endless information available at all times. That's a huge change in a very short amount of time. The brain's natural response to stimulation is kind of as though it were in a crisis. And that's what leads us to feel scattered and stressed out. But like I said, by doing the methods we're going over today, you can retrain your brain so that you can manage the information and achieve a sense of peace. So here are the 5 symptoms that we're going to go over. These are part of what's in the diagnosis of ADHD, and of course, in a lot of other people as well. So these include impulsivity, so that's being driven to act by how you feel in the moment. Inner restlessness, it's just a sensation of being unable to relax. Decreased focus, so unable to concentrate on tasks, especially those that might be boring to you. Emotional reactivity, so this is losing your center with frustration rather than feeling peaceful regardless of circumstances. And then disorganization, I think that one speaks for itself. So looking first at impulsivity. Many of us may not feel that we're impulsive, and yet how often do you click on something without thinking about it? Or automatically look at your phone because you hear the ding of an incoming message? Anytime you're doing something without thinking, that's a version of impulsivity, and it may be making you less centered and effective. Now, a simple explanation of what's happening in the brain with impulsivity is that there's part of our brain that generates ideas and impulses, so the things we feel that we want to do, and another part of our brain, the frontal cortex, for those of you who are interested, is supposed to take that urge and then evaluate it to decide whether or not it's a good idea. So the ding of the phone activates that part of the brain that gives you the urge to look at it, but the frontal cortex may decide it's more important to finish the task you're working on first. Now, alterations in the ADHD brain mean that they're less able to utilize that frontal cortex, so there's no break between the impulse and doing the activity. However, Even at those without ADHD, the brain kind of works along the principles of use it or lose it. So each time we go straight from impulse to action, hearing the phone to checking it, we strengthen that impulsive part of the brain, and we're not strengthening the part that allows us to think about it first. So it's all about these different connections. The ones we use tend to get stronger. The ones we don't use tend to get weaker. So if we're only using that reactive, impulsive part, that gets very strong, and our ability to use the calmer thinking part gets weaker. So what can we do about this? If it feels impossible to resist impulses, it's time to impose structure externally. And there are several ways to do this. So first, we can schedule those things that are likely to be distractions. So instead of just checking email continuously throughout the day, set aside specific times for that purpose. So often this would be checking your email in the morning, then maybe before or after lunch, and then maybe again towards the end of the workday. You can also choose specific times to check voicemail and text. Listening to or reading all your messages at once is obviously less disruptive than taking every one as it comes in. Now, when I personally started limiting checking my email to once in the morning and once in the evening, I was amazed at how many issues came up during the day and then were resolved by the time I checked my evening emails. So in the absence of me immediately answering emails, people were actually figuring out things on their own. So another benefit of this can be fewer things to do in general. Another way of managing the incoming email or voicemail messages is to use them to motivate you to focus. And there's a neurochemical basis for this. So when we hear a sound letting us know a new message is arriving, that actually stimulates a little bit of dopamine release in the brain. Dopamine is a feel-good neurochemical that the brain releases when it's anticipating new information. Dopamine also plays a large role in helping us to focus and stay on tasks. So when you hear the sound alerting you to a new message, decide a certain amount of work to complete before checking it. So say you're working on writing something, I'm going to finish writing this page before I check that message. This allows you to have that dopamine on board from hearing that there's a new message available and allows you to help focus on completing that task. In addition, checking the phone becomes a reward for completing the tasks, which can kind of help motivate you. The next symptom we have is inner restlessness. So inner restlessness is the adult version of hyperactivity. So ADHD adults may be able to sit in a chair, which is what we think of with children, but they carry this vague sense of unrest. So no matter what, they find it very difficult to relax. And modern life, again, has created this symptom in all of us, or many of us. Think of how long you're able to wait in a waiting room or line without looking at something on your phone. The more easily we're able to get information, the less patience we have. So this is that use it or lose it principle at work again. As we're getting all of these sound bites of quick information, we're stimulating the part of the brain that's driven by novelty. And this drives us to keep seeking novelty in order to stay stimulated. It's kind of an addictive loop. This doesn't allow us to access the part of the brain that helps us relax and keeps us in kind of a restless state. However, by doing exercises to strengthen the other part of the brain, the part that helps us relax, we can end up feeling at peace. So this involves incorporating the life-changing practice of mindfulness. Now, many of you have probably heard of mindfulness. It's been described in many different ways, but I like to describe it as a state of noticing the present moment without thinking about it or judging it. And one powerful way of doing that is to engage the senses, and that allows the restless thinking mind to take a break. So we're going to try this now. You can either close your eyes or stare at this picture. First, we're going to take a couple of really deep breaths. So see if you can expand your ribs and abdomen on the inhale, and then make the exhale long and slow, almost like you're blowing on soup. So inhaling, pushing those ribs apart and the abdomen out, And exhaling very slowly. Now, continue breathing deeply, and I want you to notice all the parts of you that have contact with the chair. So we're engaging our sense of touch. So breathing deeply, feel all the parts that have contact with the chair. Feel if your fingertips are touching anything. If any thoughts come up, just allow them to pass without engaging them or adding thoughts to them. Continuing to breathe. See if you can sink a little deeper into the chair, allowing it to take more of your weight, releasing any tension. Good. Now, as you're breathing deeply, I want you to engage the sense of hearing. So listen to the background sounds in the room. Of course, there's my voice, but there's also background sounds. Just listen for those. And as you continue to breathe, notice if there's any taste in your mouth, any smells in the air. If you're looking at the picture, notice the colors and shapes without thinking about what you're seeing. And I'm going to have you just take another several deep, slow breaths, just engaging the various senses. All right, and taking another deep breath, coming back into your normal state. How did that feel? Most people feel calmer and more centered. Now, we only did that for a couple of minutes. Usually a longer practice is much more effective. You can imagine how you would feel if you were able to take longer mindfulness breaks, either throughout the day or whenever you're feeling restless or stressed, or even setting aside a time each day for a very long practice. Researchers looking at functional MRI brain scans of people have noticed that it actually changes the way the brain functions to do this practice, even in as little as 8 weeks. Now, moving on to another hallmark symptom of ADHD, and that's the difficulty with focus. So focus is required to be able to stay on task, take in written or spoken information, especially when you aren't so excited about that task or information. So what's going on in the brain with focus? We know that those with ADHD have trouble with focus due to neurochemical issues. For those without ADHD, our brains have become so used to constantly being able to access new information that it feeds into that addictive pattern of needing that stimulation, similar to what I described with restlessness. So the novelty seeking makes anything other than what you're working on seem to be a necessary distraction. So particularly something with a bit of surprise to it, like the text messages and emails we discussed, or even the activity of your coworkers, or knowing that there's exciting stuff waiting for you on Facebook or the internet. So what can we do to improve focus in the workplace? The key is to reduce the distractions in the office. So unfortunately, this has become much more difficult with the open office plans that many now work in. So those with ADHD can ask for accommodations, such as a divider to be put around their workplace, so that even if you're at a table with others, your direct line of vision is only on that divider. And that's a consideration for anyone if you feel like your eyes are wandering too much. If a divider isn't possible, another idea is to have a focus object in your area. So a small statue, a soothing photograph, such as the one in the slide, something that every time you're tempted to look up, you take your eyes only to that object. There's nothing new about the object, so it won't break your focus. And doing this with each urge to look elsewhere will strengthen your brain to resist distractions. Now, another distraction is the noise and others' conversations that may disrupt your ability to focus. And an obvious answer to this is noise-canceling headphones. So not only do these block out the sounds around you, but people are often just less likely to try to engage you in conversation if they see that you're wearing headphones and working. Now, even if you have an individual office with a door, people may still want to interrupt. So something as simple as a sign for your door that states you're focusing on a task and then gives a time you will be available will decrease coworkers interrupting you and give you the time you need to focus. And of course, that will decrease the stress that such interruptions cause. So you can do this as needed for specific tasks, or you can just decide that from 11 to 12, for example, you're going to put that sign up so you know each day I have that uninterrupted time to focus. So now we're going to turn our attention to another symptom, which is emotional reactivity. So another hallmark of those with ADHD is what's called low frustration tolerance. And what this means is they have an inability to be patient and manage feelings of frustration, which feeds into being more emotionally reactive to various situations. And I've included a couple of popular ones here on the slide. So on the left there, we have a traffic map from the last time it rained in Los Angeles. As you can see, Angelinos have a little bit of trouble with rain. And then the trusty computer issues that often cause frustration on the right. So for somebody with ADHD, they want to immediately act on an idea, and any of these obstacles or waiting cause that unbearable frustration. And once again, this is something that we're seeing more and more as people get used to having everything instantly. So I have no idea how any of us survived the days of dial-up, except our brains weren't used to getting things instantly, so maybe we were better able to process that frustration and wait. Our expectations were different. However, now our brains are so used to being able to click and get instant information that it's harder to tolerate when a page won't load or another issue gets in our way. So again, by not using our brain to cope with waiting, we've become more impatient, and many of us have less frustration tolerance and are more emotionally reactive. So how do we deal with this reactivity? The key is to remember those different parts of the brain with their different functions. So part of the brain is designed to react, and that's the part that's automatically activated when we get frustrated. In order to bring peace and calm to the situation, we need to activate another part of the brain. We discussed one way of doing this with mindfulness, and that mindfulness exercise we did is something that you can do whenever you start to get frustrated. Or you can actually just incorporate it in pieces. So one helpful way to begin this is when you notice you're getting frustrated, just repeating something like, I'm willing to relax. So I'm willing to relax, kind of gets you in that relaxed state, and then you can engage your senses. You can do it the way we did it, breathing deeply and exhaling slowly while focusing on your senses. Or you can even do something like rubbing your fingers together or against something, taking a drink of something to really focus on the sense of taste, noticing a particular aspect of an item on your desk, whatever you can do to engage the senses rather than engaging that reactive part of the brain. Now, if your mind is racing with too many thoughts to really engage in focusing on the senses, another way of accomplishing pretty much the same thing is to do a streaming gratitude practice. So this is where we just start thinking of one thing after another that we're grateful for. So let's say your computer's causing frustration, taking forever to load the pages you need, and you take a moment to think statements in your head that begin with, I am grateful for. For example, I'm grateful for the view out the window, I'm grateful for the comfortable temperature of the room, I'm grateful for the support of my colleagues. You can go back in time to I'm grateful for the breakfast I had, I'm grateful for the teacher that encouraged me in third grade. You're forcing your brain to think in statements that begin with I'm grateful for rather than thinking spontaneously. And this gets your brain out of that reactive pattern and into a calmer state. Now, it's often helpful to look at a clock and actually time yourself. So I'm going to think of these statements for 5 minutes. Otherwise, people just tend to think of a few and give up. But you actually want to make your brain work at it. Think of 5 minutes of these statements, and it will bring you into a calmer state. Now, the next issue is disorganization. When people think of ADHD, disorganization is often at the top of the list of symptoms. From forgetfulness to time management issues, a lot can fall through the cracks. But organization can be difficult for anyone, especially now that life moves so fast and there's so many more details to keep track of. Of course, when we forget to keep track of these details or events, life starts feeling like chaos. One of the primary reasons for disorganization is forgetfulness and being unable to keep track of details. So what to do? My first recommendation is to stop thinking. Now, it sounds a little bit funny, but what I'm referring to is not depending on thinking of things to remember them. So like I've said, we're getting more information than the brain was designed to handle, so we have to have other ways of keeping track of details. One of the obvious ways is making lists of the things that you need to remember. So the to-do list that you want to check each day, but also lists for other activities. There's a lot of different apps that are available to do this on your phone, but even just using the notes function on your phone can do this. So you can have a list labeled groceries that you add to as you think of items that you need and then erase them as you go through the grocery store. You can also do this for packing lists. So a packing list for business trips, a packing list for vacation that lists all the different things you would need to pack. Another way of organizing items is by doing it in different bags. So if you have items that you need for the gym, for example, or for work, have a separate bag for each one of these. And then, of course, after you've used those items, you put them back in the bag. And that means whenever you're heading to the gym or to work, you just have to grab that particular bag rather than think about and find what you need to bring. And you can have a smaller bag with things like your phone, wallet, lipstick that maybe you want to have in each bag. Another idea is to make sure that you trip over things that you need to remember. So if there's something you need to remember for work one day or something that you need to remember for a kid's activity, putting it right in front of the front door so that you'll literally trip over it if you don't take it with you. Or putting something on the mirror in the bathroom where you know you're going to look to get ready in the morning. So taking the thinking out of remembering. Another aspect of organization is time management. Now, there's lots of ideas out there to help with making schedules, so I want to focus on another aspect of time management that's often forgotten. And that's to do things at the best time of day for you. So notice when you're most able to do something that requires concentration, like writing, for example, and those times when you're least able to concentrate. And often there's a neurochemical basis for why this is easier at one time rather than another. So for people with ADHD, it's usually best to do activities that require concentration first thing in the morning when levels of the neurochemical that facilitates concentration are at their highest. In the afternoon is when these levels start to fall off and most people are more mentally slowed. So that's a good time to return phone calls, check emails, exercise, things that don't need that concentration. So unfortunately what I see is a lot of people automatically check emails first thing in the morning, which doesn't need much concentration, and then they've wasted that prime concentration time. So to review, let's run through the tools that you now have to keep your brain centered when so many things are trying to make you scattered. So we went over the mindfulness practice, scheduling distractions like email and the phone, using these distractions to motivate you to complete a task, blocking sights, sounds, and interruptions in order to be able to focus, using mindfulness and streaming gratitude practices to calm yourself when you get frustrated, stopping trying to remember things by thinking, and managing your time according to how well you complete different tasks at different times. So these were just some of the challenges faced by adults with ADHD that are now becoming issues for all of us. I gave you those tools that I hope you'll find helpful. And as she mentioned, I actually wrote a self-help guide that gives more solutions and goes into much more in-depth ways of actually transforming the brain to be more centered, focused, and productive. And it also goes into more of the symptoms that people with ADHD and others have. also includes a quiz that helps you determine whether you might have adult ADHD, and it goes into other treatment options available. So what you see on this slide are the paperback version on the left and the Kindle version on the right. And both of these are available on Amazon. So in conclusion, it's possible to remain centered in this age of technology that is driving us all to be more scattered. And I hope you'll actually practice the tools I shared and find them helpful. Now, if you suspect that this is more of an issue, that you may have ADHD so that your brain needs more support to implement these tools, I hope you'll educate yourself on your options through my book, through contacting a healthcare professional. And now I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mayer, for your presentation. I'm going to go ahead and take control back of the screen, and we'll get into our Q&A shortly. Everyone, if you'd like to go ahead and start asking your questions in that questions panel, please go ahead and do so now. Here again is Dr. Mayer's contact information if you'd like to get in touch and learn more. And just a few reminders before we get into our Q&A. Again, we'll be giving away 3 copies of Dr. Mayer's book, From Scattered to Centered. And all you need to do is fill in the feedback form at the end of the session today. It'll pop up on your screen when we exit the webinar. And we'll also be giving away 3 copies of Pierre Kwan's new book, The Perfect 15-Minute Day Journal, as well, which is coming out soon. And once more, I'd like to invite you to take advantage of our community resources for you. We have our Less is More blog, and you can join our Accomplishing More with Less groups on Facebook and LinkedIn, and follow our founder, Pierre, on Twitter. Some upcoming webinars at People on the Go that are available to you. Microsoft Word techniques coming up in early this month. We have PowerPoint techniques as well. And then later on this month, managing and organizing your email inbox with Outlook and Excel techniques. And you can find more information about these again by visiting our website. Okay, great. And now we're ready for your questions. Karen, you asked, you didn't see the assessment there. I believe that's the assessment that Dr. Mayer mentioned in the book. If not, go ahead and feel free to add a little clarification to that, and we'll get you more information. If you're referring to the feedback form, that's going to pop up at the end of the webinar. All right, let's see. Okay, here's a great question from Margaret here. Dr. Mayer, can you explain again how to use distractions to motivate?
Sure, great question, and this can be very helpful. So the idea is that our brain gets a little bit of that feel-good neurochemical dopamine released whenever it anticipates new information. So when you hear the ding of your cell phone letting you know there's a text message, you get a little bit of that dopamine release. If you can resist looking at it and complete whatever task you're working on, you'll have that dopamine on board, which will help you focus and keep going through the task. In addition, that text or whatever it is that came through on your phone will be a reward for you for completing the task.
Great, thank you, Dr. Mayer. And by the way, the audio seems to be a little finicky coming from your end. I'm wondering if you want to just take a moment as we have some time here and maybe just reconnect to the audio, or maybe shut down another program in the back. It's just started to get spotty a little bit toward the end.
Okay, sure, I can do that. I'm wondering if it might actually be a internet connection issue.
Okay.
Is it any better now?
It's still a little spotty. I believe you're connected through the computer from our last time we met. Yeah, I'm wondering.
Right.
Yeah, I'm wondering if you want to maybe try calling in, or
Sure.
Yeah. All right. Thanks so much for waiting, everyone. We're just going to give Dr. Mayer a few moments to reconnect, and we'll hang on for your questions. Thank you so much for asking them there. I see a lot of great questions coming in.
Hi, is this any better?
That's a lot better. Thank you so much. Yeah, that's excellent.
Oh, goodness. Well, I hope people are able to hear the presentation.
Oh yeah, they did. It just started happening toward the very end. So I think we're all fine now. Okay, great. Well, we have a lot of questions coming in, so we'll try to get to as many as possible.
Great.
Dr. Mayer, how do you address the urge to multitask?
Okay, that's a good question. So we feel like we're accomplishing a lot when we're multitasking. Unfortunately, we're putting our brains in kind of that stressed state because the brain was really designed to do one thing at a time. So the quickest answer to that question is don't. Although I know many of us, feel like we need to do it. But the more we can focus on one task at a time, the more efficiently we use our brain and the calmer we'll be. So, as much as possible, trying not to multitask, to really try to be present and just do one task at a time.
Great, thank you. That's really helpful. You mentioned a lot of great suggestions for how to practice mindfulness. How do you feel about keeping a journal? Is that a helpful practice for mindfulness?
Keeping a journal is a really great practice in general. It can be good for gratitude. It can be helpful for mindfulness if you keep a journal of those moments that you were kind of in the flow or very present. So at the end of each day, keeping track of, you know, this moment where I was present. I watched the sunset, to kind of remind you of being in that present state. Mindfulness itself is really best experienced. Um, so as opposed to writing it down, really just experiencing the senses.
Wonderful. And Dr. Mayer, are you seeing companies addressing these issues kind of on a wider basis, and maybe even at the university level too, for students or staff there? Are you seeing that at all in the people that you're meeting with?
So yes and no. So yes, on the one hand, universities and businesses are getting better about making accommodations for people with ADHD. So if someone asks for accommodations, they can be given more time. They can be given things to reduce distraction, which I think should be available for anyone who asks for it. At the same time, I would say no, because a lot of office environments are going to more this open plan
Mm-hmm.
where people are all together at a table and you just have so many more distractions and so much more temptation to engage with each other, which obviously makes it harder to focus.
Right, exactly. And I believe you mentioned this in the presentation, but just want to clarify this. Are there typically better times for high focus activities, or does it just kind of depend on the individual?
Well, I think everyone should try to figure out for themselves when they focus best because it can be individual. However, in general, we know that one of the neurochemicals that help us concentrate, which I didn't mention, but the name is acetylcholine, that neurochemical is highest when we first wake up, and then it goes down throughout the day. So, in general, people tend to concentrate better in the morning.
Very good. Thank you. Here's a good question here. Michelle asks, I find I start projects easily, but it's difficult to follow through and finish them. Can you explain, maybe why that is, or does that have something to do with what we're talking about here in terms of potentially ADHD symptoms?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I had to limit the number of symptoms that I went through in this talk just because it was pretty quick. So I eliminated that one, which is one of the hallmarks of ADHD, and that's poor follow through. So people with ADHD get very excited about a task, they'll figure out a schedule and their goals, and then within a couple of weeks, they tend to lose motivation. This is a big problem. One way to overcome that is through accountability. So if you can find somebody to be accountable to, if it's a fitness plan, a buddy that you do things with, or, just having a friend or a coworker that you will check in with every so often as you're supposed to be completing tasks, just having something external to kind of keep you going with it can be helpful. However, this is one of those symptoms where if you find that you're just absolutely not able to do it, you would want to talk to a healthcare professional that maybe you need a little bit of help, neurochemically through medication in order to be able to follow through on things.
Wonderful, thank you. And Teresa asks, I have a staff member who exhibits many of these behaviors and he's struggling with his performance. Are there any other tools that you know of that I can use to coach him into being more focused, or would it be, kind of a combination of incorporating some of the suggestions that you shared today?
Good question, and kind of both. So the suggestions that I mentioned today, if you're trying to help another person, one of the features of ADHD is getting overwhelmed with too many details. So by breaking down things for people as much as possible, so say you want to help a coworker with a project, really breaking down what the steps are of those projects, and then giving them that accountability. So here's this project, it's due Friday, why don't you do this on Tuesday, this on Wednesday, this on Thursday? I'm going to check in with you at the end of each of those days. So giving them small steps and then also that accountability to keep them on task.
Great. And Michelle says, I enjoyed the mindfulness exercise, and I think we all did, which was really great. Are there any other practices that you would recommend to help us relax? And I'm going to add a little bit to there. I think most of us are talking about maybe in two areas, in the workplace, and then also on our own time.
Yeah, there's so many. So, the mindfulness practice is good. There's also something that's called pranayama, or you could just call it breathing exercises. So if you've been in a yoga class that's done some breathing exercises, there's several different breathing exercises that will also help get you into that state. And then there's also several different types of meditation that can also get you into that state. So mantra repetition, just many different types.
Awesome. Thank you. Let's see here. Let's get to maybe a few more
And
questions.
I'm sorry, let me just add one thing to that because
Yeah.
there's a really great resource online. There's the Mindfulness Center at UCLA. And if you go online to marc.edu, it's M-A-R-C. I think it's marc.ucla.edu, or if you could just look up MARC at UCLA. They have guided meditations online and a variety of resources to give you more information.
Okay, great. I'm going to send those URLs to the whole audience here so you guys can check those out. That should be coming to you in the chat panel there. Okay, we'll take just a few more questions here as we've gone over time a little bit. Let's see here. Yeah, this is an interesting question. How do you feel about this, Dr. Mayer? How can you avoid the appearance of being antisocial when you block interruptions at work?
That's a good question. So when I was mentioning about blocking the interruptions, like with using the sign, one key part on that sign is not just to let people know you're concentrating on a task, but also to let them know when you'll be available. So working on a task until 12, or, I have a deadline, I'll be available at 4, or something like that. So they know you're concentrating, but they also know that you want to be available to them.
Great. That's wonderful. For working parents, young children introduce chaos and disorganization in the home and can make focusing on the many to-dos challenging. And I'm sure you see this Dr. Mayer, and your patients. Do you have any advice or tips for this?
Yeah, this is a big challenge. And it's basically the same tips. So being very organized yourself and having structure and routine for the kids. They'll resist it, but it's really important to have that structure and have that routine. And then being able to stay on task yourself and bring them into that. But it is a challenge.
It is a challenge, yes. And then I think we'll end on this last question here pertaining to the meditation practice that you mentioned. What are the changes to the brain that we're seeing with the 8 weeks of meditation that you mentioned?
Sure. So just briefly, I mentioned there's kind of a reactive part of the brain, and that's the really centers around the amygdala. If you're interested, that's part of the brain. And what was noticed on these MRIs is that, the amygdala fires whenever they would show photographs of things that would normally be something to cause a reaction. After doing the practice for 8 weeks, they noticed that the amygdala firing had calmed down, whereas part of the frontal cortex, that more executive functioning part of the brain, was more active. So that was the change. Less reactive, more executive functioning.
Okay, wow. And have you seen with your patients, have you seen quite a transformation when they commit to a daily meditation practice? And if so, how much is recommended?
I definitely have. So I recommend whatever it will take to get you to be consistent. So if
Mhm.
that's 1 minute a day or 5 minutes a day, that's better than doing an hour once in a while.
Okay.
So ideally, it would be great if you could do 30 minutes once a day, but start with five.
Great. Well, thank you all so much for your questions. I greatly appreciate it. I know Dr. Mayer does too. Dr. Mayer, thank you so much for your presentation. It was excellent. And everyone, please, one last reminder is to again fill out that feedback form, and the incentive are a couple of great books that you could be receiving. And I'd like to also just say thank you again for joining, and we'll be sending you information on how to watch the recording in an email tomorrow. Thank you again, Dr. Mayer, and you all have a great rest of your day.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye.